right here on France 24. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're looking at red lines on Syria and which way the pendulum is swinging. With us to talk about it, Franco-Syrian photojournalist Amr Abed Rambo, Ziad Majed, teaches at the American University of Paris, Laurie Dundon of the Partnership for a Secure America, and from Moscow, Dmitry Soslov, who joins us there from one of the from the Moscow-based. Excuse me, I got my papers confused. Dmitry, Moscow-based Center for Comprehensive European and International Studies. Welcome back to all of you. We were talking in part one of our discussion about the chemical weapons issue, but there's also the news out of the town of Qusair. For 17 days, Syrian government troops openly fighting alongside Hezbollah. They laid siege to that town. Well, this Wednesday, confirmation, Qusair has fallen, complete with Iranian congratulations for the army and for the Syrian people for their, quote, victory over the Takrifi terrorists. What does that mean, the Takrifi terrorists? Takfiri, excuse me.
The Muslim fundamentalist, very hard legacy or... But it's very interesting. I mean, even when I look at your title, the title for the debate, saying "Is Assad winning?" I mean, we have to, if we want to be honest with ourselves, we have to really look at the situation. You have an army of 300,000 people who just got the first, let's say, victory in a year on a very small town, and they could not do it without the support of a foreign militia that comes from Lebanon. So instead of saying, is Assad winning, I would say, is Syria being invaded? You know, there is a foreign attack on Syria, on the Syrian people. So words are quite important. We have to be very careful with what we're saying. This is what is presented today as a huge military victory. And at the end, as I hear or I've read on the internet, people saying this is the end of the revolution, the rebels are defeated, etc. Let's be honest, we've been hearing things like that for the last 2 years. And until today,
nonetheless,
the revolution is not...
Qusair, a strategic town on the road north. There are reports now that the army might be moving on Aleppo, where you were recently. It is a big blow for the rebels.
As I tell you, they couldn't do it without the army couldn't do it without foreign support. So I'm not sure it is that big blow. But the days will tell us more. I mean,
Laurie Dundon?
Well, I was just going to say, one of the things we're looking at a number of these headlines coming out today, the fall here, and then the news about chemical weapons, and we're saying, is one of these things going to end it? Are we going to pull people to the table in a peace conference, or suddenly decide on, a significant military intervention to the point that it will solve the problem? We're not looking at anything like that. Unfortunately, this is likely to be continuing for quite a while, the to and fro. So I think what is going on in capitals is trying to assess what threads are now coming together and what steps do we need to, or we perhaps overdue in taking to kind of create a step change. One of those steps is the question about the Geneva talks. And I don't think they're intending to get a full deal out of Geneva that would be sustainable, but to try to start getting people around the table, try to force both sides to start to make their own assessments of whether they're willing to go and talk. For example, as you just said, Assad has real battlefield challenges and may not see his future trajectory as all that hopeful if it's going to be, need to be at the behest of Hezbollah and Iran. The rebel side may have their own questions of trajectory too. How sustainable do they see their current resources, splits within the factions? How do you pull all these threads together when you have an issue of momentum? Chemical weapons discoveries are a part of that momentum. The situation on the ground is a part of that momentum. And the international diplomacy, for example, between states like the U.S. and Russia, which has changed of late, is part of that momentum. Now can you weave those threads together?
It certainly seems dim for a lot of people out there. One person tweeting us, Assad is winning what? A ruined Syria. What is he going to do with the majority Sunnis then, is the tweet we've gotten. Now, you were mentioning the momentum that they're trying to build towards this Geneva conference this Wednesday. The UN and Arab League envoy in Geneva Lakhdar Brahimi with both U.S. and Russian delegations, trying to get all those parties to the table in July, including, as Dmitry Suslov was mentioning earlier, the Syrian opposition in exile, which still seems bitterly divided. Now, that was a point that was picked up on, it seems, by Russia's president when he met EU leaders on Tuesday.
What's the obstacle? The obstacle is probably the lack of goodwill among the armed opposition and inability to determine the list of participants from the armed opposition to take part in this conference. We hope that all these issues will be solved as soon as possible.
So yeah, Majed, he's got a point. In fact, today, Lakhdar Brahimi was asked, and he says, yeah, it's a big embarrassment that right now the opposition isn't coming to the table.
First, if Assad wanted a solution or a compromise, things could have been easier from the beginning, much easier. These kind of regimes that reached power by coup d'etat, military coup d'etat, his father in 1970.
Here, Vladimir Putin is talking about the opposition.
But this is a way of displacement of the real problem. The problem is not the opposition.
So he doesn't have a point?
No, not at all. And it's not important whether the opposition is really unified behind one position, because what unifies today the majority of the Syrian people and most factions of the opposition is the necessity of seeing Assad leave Syria after 43 years of rule.
It is important, isn't it? You need to know who you give the keys to the candy store to if you topple Assad.
This is the choice of the Syrian people. It's up to them to choose. The whole idea of dealing with the Middle East and with the Arab countries as if there should be one despotic rule that is capable of unifying everyone is an Orientalist and a culturalist approach that does not recognize the right of the people to organize themselves. No, because the idea of seeing one unified leader, for instance, replacing Assad, is a reproduction of the same idea of having one man who is capable of unifying everyone, even by force. And in fact, these kind of regimes were capable of becoming alone with no alternatives because they assassinated and they sent to exile and they put in jail all those who could have been alternatives. So now there is a big problem when it comes to the characteristics of the Syrian opposition, of the way it's performing politically, of the fact that sometimes they cannot reach good compromises, for sure. But it is not the problem. The problem is Assad regime that should leave. And after that, there could be lots of possible agreements, similar to what happened in many other places in the world, the role of the UN. And just, I will finish here, it's definitely to go back to what your Russian guest said before. For sure, Tehran and Moscow do not have the same agenda for Syria. But the result, the ending result, is that they are both supporting the Syrian regime. And also the allies of the opposition might not have the same agenda, which is normal. But we are in a situation where Assad doesn't want to leave power. And the international community is saying, what is the alternative? The alternative is the Syrian people.
That's it. Laurie Dundon, the fact that the opposition is divided, should that...
One of the frustrations is that, well, this question that you're getting into is, I'm sorry, I cut you off there, is the question of who's even going to come to the table, and should that hold us back from even having the talks at all, when we need to be talking about not just who's there, can we sit down, but what are we going to talk about, what can be agreed to, what can be committed to by the people in the room. The problem about a unified voice of a delegation coming to the meeting is making sure that people can live with and implement it afterwards. You want to make sure you don't have 5 different voices saying 5 different things and then going home and not able to control
so you need someone
what happens
to speak
on the
for
ground.
The rebels.
Or you need a coalesced group to be able to agree to terms of what they will negotiate. Enough cohesion between the ground.
Is there. The Free Syrian Army is there. They represent the majority of the
But right now, people aren't even agreeing to go sit down. And that's part of the problem.
Because they want some conditions and some guarantees that they are not going to sit with someone who killed 100,000 people, and that part of the compromise that he should stay until 2014, as Moscow is saying. They need guarantees and conditions.
Run again for elections.
And run again, exactly.
But picking up on the point you just made about the fact that a lot of the big names in the opposition are no longer there, and that there is a power vacuum of sorts among opposition leaders. Amar Abin Rabo, it seems as though there clearly is no Nelson Mandela or Charles de Gaulle or George Washington in the opposition right now.
You could say that. You could say that someone like Muaz Khatib, for instance, who resigned recently, is a figure that brings a lot of support around him. So it's not that I totally agree with Ziad. I mean, The opposition is dealing with something totally new. We've never seen something like this. So, of course, it might be disappointing. Of course, it might take some time. Of course, there are a lot of questions. But at the end of the day, we have to look, I mean, really, honestly, look at the situation. We are not here. But sometimes I feel that we are talking as if we were in March 2011, 2 years ago, and say, oh, what if this happened? What if that happened? What if Assad regime collapsed? And what will happen later? I would like to ask the other question. What if the Assad regime stays? What will happen? We have already 100,000 people killed. We have already 2 million, I think, who are displaced and refugees inside Syria and outside. What if this regime stays and is strong? What if? I mean.
Okay, so what do you want to see this Geneva conference happen, and what can they talk about if the opposition is still divided? What do you want to see on the agenda?
The Geneva is already a Geneva 2, so there was already a Geneva 1,
Yes.
and the regime we all know that the regime.
So for you, it's pointless.
It's a joke.
Is it pointless, Laurie Dunton?
I don't want to call it an act. The exercise in itself of trying to get the parties together forces other decisions to be made within each of the sides. So sitting back and saying, well, we're not even going to agree to try for a peace conference. We're not even going to try to look at what military armaments we could get into. We're just going to try to build a fence around it or ignore it. Doesn't get us in any better of a situation. So I hope that they can continue the process and try to initiate something, but keep expectations low of what's going to come out of it. Continue your consultations and your debates about what you can do to arm the opposition or take metered steps on the military front. And don't hold one hostage to the other.
It will be, exactly as Laurie said, it will be really interesting if there is a clear message at one moment to the Assad regime saying, stop. Now you have to stop and come to talk. As Ziad said earlier, until now the message is kill, kill, kill. We're going to talk a lot, but we will do nothing.
Dmitry Suslov, what do you want to see accomplished, assuming that in early July or whenever it is that this Geneva 2 takes place, and assuming that the situation is the current stalemate with the fighting continuing, what do you want to see happen in Geneva?
Well, ideally, I would like to see the political agreement between the sides, although there is a huge difficulty who will be the side on the part of the rebels. There are multiple divisions between themselves. There are many radicals and Salafis among themselves, but nevertheless, I would like to see an agreement between at least a part of the Syrian opposition and the government about ceasefire and about the future political the political future of Syria, be it with Assad or without Assad. Most probably, of course, without Assad. But it has to be a decision not imposed by the outside, but the decision elaborated by the Syrians themselves. And the kind of debate that happened before is, between your colleagues in the studio, is exactly the reason, let me say, why Russian position on Syria is so strict, because we do not want to allow anymore that some forces outside of a country declare that this regime is no longer legitimate, that this regime has to go, that the will of the people of Syria is to get rid of Assad. Well, it is the will of the part of the Syrian people, whereas the other part of the people of Syria continue to support Assad. Russia regards that kind of talk as an usurpation of decision-making in international affairs on the most sacred principle, sacred thing in international affairs, which is use of force, state sovereignty, and legitimacy or illegitimacy of these or the other regimes. And it is the deliberate policy of Russia of not to allow it. So the policy of Russia is first not to allow any foreign intervention into Syria, and this is why we tend to supply arms. And secondly, to support political reconciliation talk among the Syrians themselves.
All right, so you're saying it's against the idea of outside intervention. On Twitter, we're getting reactions which seem to sway the other way. While France and UK say that Syria's government used sarin gas against rebels, Obama says more evidence is still needed, seriously. And Another person on Twitter telling us that after sarin gas, after the nerve gas red line has been crossed, let's draw another red line the regime shouldn't cross. Hydrogen bomb, anyone? Somebody else who's who's been clamoring for a military action sooner rather than later is the leading Senate Republican John McCain, just back from a trip inside of Syria. He doubts the prospects for a peace conference.
Remember all this talk we've heard for the last year or two? It's inevitable that Bashar Assad will fall. Well, I think we can't make that statement today. As the Iranians, Hezbollah is now invaded, the Iranians are there, Russia is pouring weapons in, and anybody that believes that Bashar Assad is going to go to a conference in Geneva when he is prevailing on the battlefield, it's just ludicrous to assume that.
Laurie Dunton, you agree?
Well, I think McCain has been an exceptional voice in Washington, calling attention to this issue. It's incredibly frustrating to go back over.
So you agree with John McCain that there should be outside intervention, a no-fly zone, sending weapons to the rebels?
I agree there should be pressure in Washington to look at what they can do a lot more than what we have done. I'm not sure I agree with his full recommendations, but I think there's a lot of options that we haven't even been discussing in Washington, and we're about 2 years late. But the debate on red line has become a be-all, end-all conversation. Is that one sentence going to mean Washington will or will not do something? A good thing that has happened out of all the evidence has come out finally in the last months. Has changed the political climate in Washington significantly. Voices like John McCain are no longer sole voices, and there is a clamoring to do more. So I think there's more studied, careful look at what military options, looking at what they would do as pieces of a no-fly zone.
So in your view, things are changing.
Concrete steps need to be taken
in Washington. Yes. Before we go, it's not gone unnoticed in Damascus that there are events taking place in neighboring Turkey. What with the Prime Minister Erdogan feeling the heat from a wave of protests.
There is something politically, socially and economically wrong within Turkish society. It confirms as well that Erdogan's government is pretending to be secular, but in reality is still acting with an Islamist extremist logic.
Amar Abed-Rabo, your thoughts on the commentary there on what's going on in Istanbul?
There was something totally surreal a few days ago. There was a travel, how you say that, a travel warning? A travel warning to the Syrians saying don't go to Turkey because it's very dangerous what's happening, etc. And so, of course, it's funny, but it wasn't at all, it wasn't humor. I mean, it was very serious on Syrian TV and Syrian official media. I really can't see any way to compare things. Okay, there are demonstrations. I believe Erdogan is someone who may lose elections and leave power. He's firing tear gas on demonstrators. I'm not a fan of tear gas, but it's much better than Kalashnikov real bullets. So for the moment, I don't see any way to compare things, even if Damascus is really happy with what's happening in Turkey.
All right, Amar Abed-Rabo, Laurie Dunton, Ziad Majed, and Dmitry Suslov in Moscow. Get ready because James Creedon is with us. Let's say hello to him now. How are you, James?
Evening, François.
And this has, of course, been setting the Twitter sphere and the social media alight.
Well, it has. Lots of people linking to the editorial of Le Monde today, which has been explaining how the process, basically, of how those samples of urine, blood, hair were brought from Syria to French army labs. And also, we can see the article was written by Nathalie Nougayred. And I suppose
Editor-in-Chief of Le Monde.
That's right. And I think one of the chief points she wanted to make, François, was that this is not a case of media and government complicity.
No collusion.
No collusion. That's the main point she's trying to make. The elements in the article that are used to point that out or to confirm that are that the initial report, wasn't intended to look at the whole issue of sarin gas or chemical weapons, but that when the reporters on the ground saw the extent of the use of toxic gas, they decided to try to spirit some of those samples out to have them investigated. And she points out as well that a written declaration or a written, what would you say, guarantee was provided by the French government, ensuring that Le Monde would have access to those French army laboratory analyses.
All right, let me put this to Amr Abed-Rabo, because there's been journalism ethics questions raised about this. You're the journalist in the room. The fact that this is apparently the only lab in France, possibly Europe, that can do this kind of analysis, but it's a French military lab. Is that a bit of a shame in your view?
It's not a shame. Of course, as a journalist, we might be saying that Le Monde has gone maybe too far in a certain way. It's possible. But on the other hand, nobody's doing this job. I'm very happy and I'm very proud that a journalist is doing it. What can we say? I mean, you have two choices with this situation. Either you sit and do nothing, or you do something, maybe too much, maybe too far, but at least you're doing something.
I think perhaps what Le Monde is concerned about as well, and why they were trying to make this distinction that we're not working in the hands of the government, etc., is the New York Times and their front page editorial 10 years ago when Judith Miller essentially made the case for war. So I think what Le Monde certainly does not want is to gain that reputation of being the French newspaper that made a case for war in Syria. So they were really saying, look, we had a guarantee from the French government saying that we would have access to these sarin samples that were tested positive in a French army lab. But they do start that editorial by saying, look, it is now clear and categorical that chemical weapons have been used in Syria.
So once again, that Iraq precedent high on everyone's mind.
Absolutely. But speaking of the US connection, let's take a look at Plantu, the Monde cartoonist, and his cartoon today, I suppose, pointing out US reticence, despite this very clear statement by France and by Le Monde that chemical weapons have been found
hold me
in
back
Syria.
Or I'll do nothing.
There you go.
So there you go. And why are there two Obamas? I guess one is from the first term and the other's from the second?
One is his shadow.
Oh, his shadow.
It's Freudian,
okay.
right? Now let's move on to, I suppose, some Twitter reaction. Karim Lebour, who we know here at France 24, France's evidence that sarin gas was used in Syria is barely a smoking gun, he says. We still don't know with certainty who used it. Now that, I suppose, is a reference to some of these controversial reports that we've seen in the last month. Carla Del Ponte of the UN saying perhaps Syrian rebels may have used sarin gas. She stepped back on that statement, but said that, declarations were made to the UN to that effect. A lot of internet users also today, Francois, linking to articles such as this one in the French business paper Les Echos, pointing to Turkish arrests of Syrian Islamist rebels who also had sarin gas. So this whole notion of who has sarin gas, is it just Bashar al-Assad? Is it even Bashar al-Assad? Those questions are being asked. Now, I think this is, I suppose, the clearest image that might indicate the risks of France going down this road of, pointing the finger about weapons of mass destruction, etc. What do you think that is, Francois?
It looks to me. I can see what it is. It's the French foreign minister meshed into Colin Powell, who was the U.S. Secretary of State.
There you go.
When they made the decision to invade Iraq.
This is from a Tumblr blog by a guy. He does these Tumblrs of blended faces.
Some people have more spare time than us.
I think so. Well, do you want to see a few more? There's also a Tumblr with that is Vladimir Putin and Bashar al-Assad.
That's not very nice for Putin.
Certainly not. I don't think it's nice for anyone, really. You've got, now moving well away from Syria, you've got Dominique Strauss-Kahn and Christine Lagarde.
You're digressing here,
You've got Jacques Chirac and François Hollande. Well, you've got to digress when there's this sort of stuff, right? And I think my personal favourite, even though it's not from the same blog, is Merkozy. I think every chance I can get, I try to pull that picture up. Now, Francois, before we go, just to come back to something I was discussing last night.
Tear gas to pepper spray.
That's right, in Turkey, as controversial really in the last 24 hours. Now, this is a photo of a young woman by the name of Seyla Sungar. She is, in fact, an academic at the Istanbul Technical University. Now, she's become, in some senses, the symbol of a lot of the disquiet and unrest in Istanbul. And I'll just show you some more of those photos. She was tear-gassed, wearing a red dress, etc. And it has provoked a huge amount of reaction on social media. Just showing you some of those reactions. The woman in red in Turkey, I wish to wear such a dress in downtown Cairo without fear, without protests, without sexual harassment. That's an echo, I think, of concerns within Turkey that Erdogan and his party could roll back on women's freedoms and secular values. So I suppose it shows how these protests have become much broader. It's not just about that park in central Istanbul, it's about Erdogan's way of governing.
All right. Well, James Creedon, I want to thank you very much from you. I want to thank our guests here in the France 24 debate. Thank you for being with us. Stay with us. More news coming up at the top of the hour.